So it's what we're going to do here is, this is obviously our finished floor level. And so Mike is setting up the level on here, so you know exactly where that sits, and that will be transferred across to this new mix that's being laid here. They're going to use the level to lay the whole of this. As in this section we put screening rails in, here it's going to be levelled just using the level. So you can see there's a nice system going here where we're trying to move the material about as little as possible. You've got a very stodgy mix, and taking spot levels all over the place just to make sure it's there, so you're not putting material on and taking it off again. It's gently working your way down, so there's a nice flow and consistent system to the way they're achieving the level. It's also not being over conscious about the finish on this at the moment. That will be created when we've got an even level across the whole thing, and it will be floated up. So whenever you're joining materials together and you've got a wet material meeting a dry material, the dry material is going to suck the moisture out of the mix, and it will lose a certain amount of that bond. So Vince is now just wetting down this edge, giving it a really good soaking, so that junction will be good. So you can sort of see the consistency that this came out. But I'm just going to fill up this litre pot. And it's not exactly a slump test, but it will give you an idea of how it drops, how it flows. So it sort of stands up, holds together, it's splayed out a little bit, but it's just that sort of consistency. You can feel it's really nice and creamy, a good sticky mix, and that's down to the lime binder in it, giving that plasticity, but also the grading of the aggregate, as saying that the larger particles down to the finer particles, and give that matrix of mix. You can see it's relatively loose. The more you vibrate, more it brings the water to the top, so you've got to be careful not to vibrate these things, otherwise you can end up with a dry mix at the bottom, and then draw all the lime, suck all the lime up to the surface. So I think also that's demonstrated in, as I said, this process that they're doing. They're not overworking areas, they're very economic in their movement, and gently bring it back, and it's a lovely, clean, tidy site, and that's finished. We'll put the next lot in here, and it'll all be drawn together, and you've got a very nice process, consistent working going on. The idea of the cork is to restrict heat that's in the floor going out into the wall. So the energy you're putting into the building, you don't want to be sucked out into the wall. With stone walls like this, it's always a little bit of a challenge, because as you can see, we've got this sort of varying thickness that's supporting the cork. It then becomes a potential issue that you've got that exposed, and how do you cover it up? Usually if flags or tiles are being laid, then they can just oversail it. But also when you come to, if you're insulating the walls, which we're actually not in this situation, because this is going to have cupboards over the top, so that will be covered. But if walls are being insulated, then that insulation can often come down and cover over the top edge of the cork insulation. So we're trying to get a nice joint line here, and Vince is then just, as this is pulling in slightly, it's going to be pulling in a little bit more next to the slab because the slab's going to have that bit of suction to it. So gently working it up so you get that nice junction. So it's not going to be seamless, but you can marry it together. And those little details just I think help with the end result. Here, where there's this existing block wall, we've set the cork here. There is a ledge underneath which the cork is actually sat on. Yeah, you can see here where it's against block, it's an awful lot easier. You don't have to bench it up, you don't have to support it. It's literally rested against it, and the slab is poured against it, so it holds it into position. But this situation is very similar to an internal partition wall of a house, where you don't necessarily have that heat loss. You want a bit of accommodation of the slab against the wall, maybe protecting the wall a little bit, but also reducing and limiting the heat drifting into the base of the wall. We reduce the draft coming through here. We just create a calm environment where it's not having wind going across it. Obviously we don't have sun issues here, but we'll just close it all up and let it settle and cure in its own time. Almost certainly you'll find in 2 or 3 days you're able to walk on this. It's always a good idea not to walk on it. Just keep away from it as much as you can. If after a couple of weeks you need to move on it, you can board it, you can protect it, but just remember you don't want to shock it. And you certainly don't put the underfloor heating on for a good month or 2. And even then, when you turn it on, you want the flow temperature going through the pipes the same temperature as the slab. If you set the thermostat low, it will still put hot water through the pipes and it will bring it up too quickly. So you want it nice and gentle. Let it pull in gently as it dries. So obviously there are a number of things that you can put onto this floor. Like that sort of texture, that surface is absolutely ideal for laying flags onto. So you've got just a little bit of grip. You don't need to overfloat it. You don't need to play around with it too much. The flags will sit on there really nicely. So the tolerance of that finish is determined by what's going on top of the floor. If you're laying thin tiles on it, then obviously you also need a thinner bed. So you can put a 15mm bed on here, which you comb, and then you lay the tiles directly onto that, in which case you want it just a little bit flatter. But it's getting that level of finish appropriate for what you're putting onto it afterwards. These 3 slabs that we've got here, we'll lay that one as soon as we can, and then once these are all dry, in 2 or 3 months' time, we're going to sand the whole thing in, and then it can all be monitored, and we'll look at wear of the finish. We'll look at how it can withstand staining and working on. But I think we'll have obviously a really nice floor. It'd be lovely to get the floor back in here so we can actually start using the barn again.